Hey y'all, Craig Walker here, Subtle Energy Mechanics. Today I want to talk about premature ejaculation for the highly sensitive or empathic person, or when you're in a couple where at least one of you identifies as highly sensitive or empathic, um, that is, may walk into a room and feel that you are tracking other people's sensations, other people's emotions or intentions. Those of you who know yourself, like you know who you are. And how does premature ejaculation fall into this story? And I want to talk about it from really a simple point of view, kind of a diagnosis, and then we can talk about a strategy and tactics to address it. But if we got to go all the way to the top to what's this diagnosis or what's the reason why this is happening in the first place. Now, I've listened to a number of other people talking about how to, with tactics for getting it to stop, tactics for looking at it as kind of a malfunction, right? That looking at it as a malfunction, that's the strategy of like, how do I deal with that malfunction? And we, hold your breath or distract yourself or slow down or pinch yourself, something like this. I'd listened to one therapist who said, well, underlying all of this is anxiety. And but there's no context. Like, yeah, we can recognize there is anxiety in there, and that is associated with all of this premature ejaculation, right? And that they may be correlated, but is anxiety what's causing it? I think that was what she said. Anxiety was causing it. And so I would question that. Is anxiety causing it, or is it anxiety an actual indication of this bigger problem that we're going to look at right now? But I'm gonna my point of view is that there's this fundamental worldview. We're playing a game, we're playing this human game, and we've learned about what we are and what we can do. And once we know what we are and what we can do, then we know if something's broken or not. And so based on this narrative of what we've been told, especially by today's scientific community, we are told that we are drawing with a bad pen. There we go. Okay. Okay. So happy people just ejaculated. Now they're snoring. Okay. Here's the issue. That here's the point of view that we study ourselves as individual people. You're over there, I'm over here. I have my lab tests, I have my physiology, I have my own anatomy, and you have yours over there. And there's the two shall meet, right? They are separate, and we can study ourselves as individual autonomous beings, right? And so that's what today's scientific view and what most of our cultural view is of what we are, right? So in this model, if you're prematurely ejaculating, well, then you got a problem that you have to fix. So we start looking for what's the fix? Drugs, exercises, distract yourself, pinch it off. If you are, say, a highly sensitive person and you're over here and you're picking up emotions from this bubble over here, you have a problem. You are nuts. You're not real. This doesn't, you're making it up. You deserve to be gaslit because you're believing a lie. Okay. So that doesn't, but and so now you're put in a position where you either have to deny your own sensation or you have to try, you got to believe, like, am I nuts? Am I making this up? And then you have to come, then you build this management strategy to get through life where you can't actually feel and certainly don't express what you're picking up in the room from other people, that there's this thing out here that you're experiencing out here in experience. The only thing you're allowed to believe is that you have a body with anatomy and physiology and emotions, and that you only can feel what's inside of you. And of course you can't feel what's over here because that's not real. So from there comes that, if you sense anything wrong with you, then that can be diagnosed and treated. And then here's where I'm getting to with the anxiety. If you have anxiety over here, that's a problem. This could be diagnosed because it's a not appropriate response to the world. A not appropriate response to the world has to be managed by medication or counseling or manipulating things in life so that your anxiety goes down. I had tremendous anxiety as a kid. I was bullied every single day, mercilessly, and then anxious all the way up, probably until it was actually right about my mid-20s, where I started playing with some things, and I had this realization, this aha moment that came after this experience in me, where I woke up one day and there was no anxiety to be seen. It wasn't just reduced, but I actually started living, and I realized that I was having a completely different body and experience, body and internal and external experience of myself in the world, where anxiety was not present. And it was the first time in my life I had ever experienced that. And I said to myself, like, wow, I've just flipped a switch. I always thought I was an anxious person. And then I realized, like, I'm not an anxious person. I'm a person who every now and then has anxiety now. And I can get into that later. It was something that I did with my diet that I realized, like, I had read a book and where talked about diet for managing your hormones. And I realized that I had been doing a very poor job with my diet for managing my hormones, and my hormones were creating a fear response in me. And because I had been doing that my entire life, I thought that's what I was. I thought I was an anxious person. And then when I changed this one thing, I had a completely different experience of myself. So I want to talk about this premature ejaculation, right? So what if there's a thing that we can change that makes you have the experience, oh my gosh, I'm not a premature ejaculator. I'm a person that has an amazing sex life, and right now, all the time, I prematurely ejaculate, but now I can see this is how I can have an amazing ejaculation. I have an amazing sex life, and rarely do I prematurely ejaculate. How do I get up there without diagnosing myself with a problem, without trying to pinch or do some weird things that come from this model of what we are? This model of myself is different. Then the only thing that I can do is pay attention in this bubble or try to distract myself with things out here. But this model of the world is completely separate beings, only gives us certain strategies and certain tactics that we can use to address a particular problem. But let's look at this other one. Now, what I started to see when I was in practice for a number of years and 50,000 client sessions, 50,000 individual client sessions, I started to see a trend in how people responded to the world and how they responded to the room and how they responded to other people in space. And this is where I actually first got to witness real life physiology of what I would call a neurodiverse, highly sensitive, empathic person. And I got to see it and do my own in-house scientific testing, like doing different things. I'll pause that for a second. One of the things that I realized was if you are the highly sensitive or empathic person, you know that when you walk into a space, you walk into a relationship, part of what you're experiencing is out here. So not only are you experiencing your own emotions, but you are experiencing in here the reports from like internal microphones that are picking up, what's happening across space. So you're not really, you're not really hearing what's happening in them from across space. Inside your body, there's like a radio station that's tuned in, one that's tuned in inside of you, but another one that's tuned in, it's actually picking up things that are actually happening in real time outside of your body. And that's this empathic or highly sensitive experience or neurodivergent experience with some people. Now, the way this is going to be an overly simplified picture, but you'll get the point. Okay, see the difference? So you have this autonomous separate self where you just know yourself to be boundaried and you have your own thoughts and your own sensations, right? And that requires kind of the dualistic point of view. I'm not throwing dualism under the bus. We're adding to dualism an aspect of unity, this yoga. Yoga means unity. And so I would say a lot of the practices in yoga, not as a religious approach, but as a scientific approach to living life in a way that's according to how we're designed, fits a lot better with this model, that some of our internal neurology and sensation picks up information from this space here. You send information into here, they send information into here. So now there's a shared, what's called collective. And in the therapy world, this is called, my therapist at one point said, there's a name for that, Craig, it's called the intersubjective third. Subjective, second subjective, third. Intersubjective, between these two people, a third. There's a third unique relationship or entity that is established here. Now, my argument is when you learn the mechanics of this, your premature ejaculation tendency, habit, goes like this. When you are interacting with yourself and your significant other as two separate things, one of the things that we do is we're watching very closely in here, or we're watching outside of us over to them to what's happening over there. So our body compartmentalizes and it over compartmentalizes our body. And when it does, and that erotic sensation starts to come up, but it's coming up inside this small champagne bottle size of a human, and we're shaking it, and it's just ready, literally, we're just ready to go. Now, if we change the container, we recognize what we really are. A better story about what we really are is this, and this thing that is shared between us. And we start to pay attention to all the subtle signs that are happening, that our two bodies are actually starting to entrain together. We're starting to co-regulate together. So the goal of an intimate exchange changes to, here, can you see down here? You can, okay. So here's a central nervous system. And here's another central nervous system. Brain, spinal cord. So that's just, those are two human bodies minus all the guts and the bones. That's the part of us that thinks. The brain and the blob and the wiggly. That's the part that thinks. Now, the part of the brain that moves are these parts down here. And this is a house of large part of the subconscious that regulates all the organs, right? And so this is the part that ends up picking up all of this subtle information from all the organs, most of which is outside of our conscious awareness. So what happens when we start to look at the physiology of this exchange? What happens is these two spinal cords start to physically entrain together. Entrain means what? When you put multiple grandfather clocks together in a room and you start their pendulums swinging at different rates, within 8 to 12 hours, I don't remember what it is exactly, all of the pendulums, even though they're not touching, all of the pendulums start to swing together. It's a property of physics. This happens when you put two nervous systems together, human nervous systems together, not just human nervous systems. Fish, you look at a school of fish. Starlings, you look at a flock of 10,000 starlings, and they're all moving in this orchestrated, entrained fashion that this model of reality would say is totally responsible, is a total responsibility of the individual birds keeping themselves perfectly spaced. And what I'm saying is there's a separate phenomenon in physics that actually enters, this is where it starts to get like even this next layer, there's this other, and maybe in religion it's called the Holy Ghost. In yoga, maybe called the Kundalini energy. There's this energy that actually can come in and move the two of you. And this is what, when I've looked into the religion, the mystical realm of sex, or the religious realm of sex. When David Day has written a book, numerous people have written books about how to find God through sex. And I would say figuring out how to tend to this intersubjective third. There are mechanics to this. So just because you may be highly sensitive and recognize you're picking up stuff across the room doesn't mean you know how to dance with that. Most of the teachings that I've heard by people who identify as empathic or highly sensitive still promote a strategy for living that's this one. Boundary yourself. Put a bubble around you, because that's logical. But that's still relational beings, which are these are relational beings. Part of what you are is inseparably generated by the relationships you are having. Like you cannot make yourself a separate bubble, but science still tells us this is what it is. And those of us who are highly sensitive find ourselves overwhelmed, and our reflexive way to manage that is to put a bubble around, to draw a boundary around. But that's not actually the best way to do it. That's not how we create safety. There's specific frequencies, actually. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 frequencies, and they're all named out in yoga, that actually establish the stability of this relationship. And as you learn to play with those frequencies, and as I said, they're called koshas, the coordination of your two spinal cords, that's what's going to determine when you orgasm. Because you can't manage your orgasm with your will. It's, if you want to, just like sit down and practice feeling into what your heart rate is, really relaxing into, feel the heart rate, and then stop your heart and just hold it stopped for a bit, and then get distracted by somebody, listen to what they're saying, all the while maintaining that internal clarity where you've stopped your heart, and now decide to start it up again. That's what you're looking at by trying to deal with your premature ejaculation here, by trying to override it. It's not going to happen. Just because we're not designed to be able to influence it. So we learn what we really are, which is this: we're relational beings. And when we learn what we really are, now we have a different map. And to get from point A to point B, as in like ejaculating when you don't want to ejaculating when you do want to, you got to walk up a different map. And so the ways to do that is to learn your mechanics. Learn that there's specific sensations that are named kosha 1, kosha 2, kosha 3, kosha 4, kosha 5, and that those have specific vibratory, like actual vibrations in the body that are part of the building blocks of what entrains the spinal cords together. And these are the building blocks of the mystical or religious sexual experience. You're not looking for that. You're just looking for a sexual experience that can last more than 10 seconds, right? So let's just play this at step 1. All right. So if this makes sense to you, then whether or not you work with me or somebody else, make sure that somebody else is trained in not trying to diagnose you with the problem based on you being separate, because they're going to diagnose you and they give you techniques. They're going to give you tactics to deal with yourself as a separate person. Anxiety comes up when you are this person living this life. That's when you should have anxiety, I would say, right? So if anxiety is underlying the premature ejaculation, well, yes, it's correlated with it, because this person has to have anxiety because they know they're living out of integrity. They know this is imposter syndrome, because your gut's telling you there's something off. You're living a lie somewhere. And here's the lie. Because there's mechanics to actually how you can be with somebody else, where the mask of your muggle suit dissolves and you are open and you are vulnerable and you are authentic. So there's the authentic self, which is merged, and the imposter self, or the mask. or the over ego defended is over here. So one of the ways to deal with this is actually to find a professional that can actually help you dissolve the tension patterns, but you can play with it, without that. But that's how I did it. I actually had to find a professional that could actually help with my spinal cord to start to dissolve and relax, so it could actually feel into space around it, because it's not just feeling into your own muggle suit, but it feels into the space between you and somebody else, and it becomes so sensitive, because that's the practice in this world, is not to become less sensitive, but to become more sensitive. But to what end? Become more sensitive and more coordinated, which means an increase in complexity in the neurology to manage more and more layers, discrete layers of reality, which means you not just can handle your own, but you start to handle somebody else's. And that's when you start to hear about people talking about this divine feminine, divine masculine. You take this present moment, you split it into two. One person plays just the management of consciousness and these conscious pillars about how to manage the body suits, and the other person surrenders even ability to know where the bodysuit is, and just surrenders to emotion and sensation coming through altogether. And that ends up being one of the most divine exchanges between two people. And so looking at premature ejaculation is this you calling over to this you to say, come on back home. You're living an untruth. And so this is the map that we want to orient ourselves to. And to the degree that breath work works, energy work works, I would say that it's addressing you. It's starting to soften the defenses. But there's real, actual, measurable mathematical mechanics to get the two of your spinal cords starting to move together. And as they do, and you can track it mathematically, as they become more and more entrained together, your spinal cord becomes less separate and more one, more unified. And as it becomes more unified, you feel the impulse to ejaculate floats off. It goes away, because you're inside the experience of timeless space. And then there's no upwelling, because there's no pressure put on the ejaculation, which is what's put on it over here. There's no pressure. So you remove the pressure, and then you move into, this is where it really starts to get to some of that mystical. You move into that room that is very short-lived in that ejaculation. But when you can move into it and float around in it for a while, that's when you're hearing from people that sex for hours and all sorts of, fancy sounding stuff. But again, seeking out professional help, somebody that knows about the words like entrainment, co-regulation, breathing, and isn't going to pathologize you, isn't going to diagnose you with a problem based on a belief that we're separate, right? But actually knows how to find how your body's and your neurology is actually holding you separate, and knows how to, with very quick and accurate coaching, can move you into here, and you should be able to feel it within the first day. This isn't something that takes a week or a bunch of different sessions. You should feel the difference in the first day. And if you don't, keep moving.